Imagine this. It's the 1960s. You turn on your TV, daytime TV, and suddenly you're getting a look inside the secret world of the mafia.
Yeah, it sounds wild, but that's exactly what happened. A congressional subcommittee basically used televised hearings to expose organized crime.
It all hinged on one guy, right?
Yeah.
Joseph Valachi.
That's the one. It was totally unprecedented. So for this deep dive, we're digging into some really fascinating sources. We've got stuff from the Levin Center, the Mob Museum, Wikipedia pages on the Genovese family, Lucky Luciano, Vito Genovese.
Okay.
A History.com piece on unions, even a Reddit thread talking about the Genovese family's power today.
So quite a mix. What's the mission here? What are we trying to figure out?
Well, we want to get why these Valachi hearings were such a big deal. What did they actually reveal, especially about the Genovese crew? And, how do they change the game for law enforcement fighting the mob?
Right. So where did this investigation even start? Who kicked it off?
It was the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, the PSI. Senator John McClellan, a Democrat from Arkansas, was chair, and the vice chair was Carl Mundt, a Republican. So bipartisan. Their first focus was pretty broad, actually. Organized crime and illicit drugs.
So tackling two massive problems at once.
Exactly. And Senator McClellan, in his opening statement back in September '63, he really set the stage. He talked about why Congress does these investigations.
Which is?
Basically, to gather information, knowledge, so they can write better laws, see if the current laws are working, and figure out if the police and FBI have the tools they need.
Makes sense. And he specifically mentioned the mafia.
Oh, yeah. He called the Cosa Nostra a form of government unto itself. Pretty strong words.
Wow. A shadow government, almost.
Sort of. And he was really zeroed in on their role in heroin trafficking,
Yeah.
Tracking it from the Middle East right into American cities.
That's a huge operation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And McClellan hoped the hearings would, well, first, give Congress solid info for new laws, but also wake up the public to how serious this was, get people talking, maybe cooperating more.
And the first big witness was Robert F. Kennedy, the Attorney General.
Right, RFK.
Mm-hmm.
And he wasn't new to this subcommittee. He'd been its chief counsel before becoming AG. So he had history there.
What did he bring to the table?
He basically laid out what the Justice Department already knew about organized crime, their ongoing fight against these, billion-dollar rackets.
Okay.
And he pointed to past successes, like the federal laws against interstate gambling that came out of the Kifo Committee hearings in the 50s, kind of suggesting, hey, these hearings can lead to real legislative change.
So they were hoping for another win like that. Did Kennedy ask for specific new tools, new laws?
He did. He made some key recommendations. Number one was wiretaps, getting authorization for wiretaps specifically in racketeering cases. That was a big ask then.
I bet. What else?
He also talked about immunity, granting immunity to crucial witnesses, guys who knew things but were terrified to talk.
Because of retaliation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He specifically mentioned maybe giving immunity to less involved people caught up in things like labor racketeering if they testified against corrupt union officials.
And that leads us right back to Valachi, doesn't it? The guy who actually did talk. Kennedy highlighted him.
Absolutely. Kennedy called him the first real insider to break that code of silence, the omerta. This was huge. It was like a crack in a dam that had held for decades.
And Kennedy gave examples of why that silence was so powerful, the violence involved.
Yeah, he talked about the sheer brutality, especially around the drug trade. He mentioned a specific case, like $150 million in heroin smuggling, murders, even a suicide attempt connected to it. Just brutal stuff.
$150 million. The money involved is just mind-boggling. And it wasn't only drugs, right? They had other schemes.
Oh, definitely. Extortion was big, loan sharking, using those extortionate loans to get their hooks into legitimate businesses, controlling them through fear.
And Valachi's cooperation, even before the public hearings, revealed something major about how they were organized.
Yes, this was maybe one of the biggest bombshells Valachi dropped early on to the Justice Department. The existence of a commission.
A commission, like a board of directors for crime.
That's pretty much it. According to Kennedy, relying on what Valachi told them, this was a national body, leaders from the major crime families across the country.
Wow. What did this commission do?
They set the rules, made major policy decisions for the entire network, settled beefs between families, carved up territories for different rackets. It showed this wasn't just scattered local gangs, it was coordinated, national.
That changes everything. It paints a picture of a much more sophisticated enemy. Did local police testify too, give their perspective?
They did. New York City's police commissioner, Michael J. Murphy, and Deputy Commissioner Leonard Reisman. They talked about the challenges on the ground.
What kind of challenges?
Well, Commissioner Murphy said, they had had some success knocking down old-school rackets, but the
Oh.
syndicates just kept adapting, getting smarter, more sophisticated, especially with narcotics.
Always evolving.
Yeah.
And the top guys were getting better at staying hidden.
That's what another NYPD guy, John Shanley, testified. He talked about intelligence showing the big bosses were deliberately insulating themselves, making it really hard to pin crimes directly on them. Layers of separation.
Which makes someone like Valachi even more valuable. Let's talk about his actual appearance. 200 U.S. Marshals guarding him.
Yeah, the security was intense. The Levin Center source mentions that. And there were strong rumors, very credible, about a $100,000 bounty put on his head by Vito Genovese, who was already in prison.
From prison. Just incredible.
Which is why Valachi got government protection. He was basically the first guy in what would eventually become the Witness Security Program. And his testimony wasn't behind closed doors, it was televised. A national spectacle.
And he laid it all out, the structure, everything.
He did. Incredibly detailed descriptions. The whole hierarchy of the New York families. The boss, the underboss, lieutenants, soldiers. He helped them draw up these charts.
Charts, like organizational charts.
Exactly. With names, photos, who reported to whom. The Levin Center notes the Genovese family chart alone had 142 names on it. They actually displayed these huge charts of hearings.
Seeing that visual, that must have been powerful for people watching. Why did he do it? What was his motivation for risking everything?
Pure fear, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
He genuinely believed the Genovese family, his own family, would kill him unless the government protected him. There's a chilling quote from him in the Levin Center material. When asked why he didn't just quit the life, he said, "Once you are in, you can't get out. They will hunt you."
Wow, trapped.
It pretty much sums it up. That quote tells you everything about the grip these families had.
And his testimony went on for days, covering all sorts of insider details.
Yeah, 4 more days after the initial appearance, he talked about initiation ceremonies, the secret rituals. He explained omerta, that absolute code of silence we mentioned, which, by the way, the Genovese Wikipedia entry and that Reddit thread both emphasized was super strong in that family. He talked about murders, internal conflicts, and, lots about drug trafficking. He even detailed his own recruitment way back in 1930. During one of the big mafia wars, and how bosses maneuvered for power.
It sounds like his testimony really put the spotlight on one family in particular, the Genovese.
Definitely. I mean, he came from that family.
Yeah.
The detail he provided, plus that huge family tree chart they displayed, it really brought the Genovese family out of the shadows.
And the sources back that up, their importance.
Oh, yeah. The Wikipedia page calls them the oldest and largest of the 5 families, and it notes they're still around, adapting to the 21st century, getting into things like mortgage fraud, offshore gambling. They evolve.
Still adaptable after all this time, which is a key challenge for law enforcement, isn't it?
Absolutely, they don't stand still. And that Wikipedia entry also mentions their intense loyalty, that strong omerta. It says, historically, very few Genovese members ever became government witnesses. Only 11, apparently.
Only 11. Out of how many? Over how long? That's tiny.
It's incredibly low. Speaks volumes about their internal discipline, or maybe the fear they inspire. There's that quote from Detective Joseph Coffey calling them the Ivy League of the underworld.
The Ivy League, meaning sophisticated elite.
Exactly. Smart, secretive, powerful. And that Reddit thread we looked at, people discussing the Genovese family seem to agree.
What are they saying on Reddit?
Well, a lot of talk about how their strength comes from that secrecy, but also their wealth. They mention real estate, restaurants, construction, and big-time control of the New Jersey waterfront. A major port, lots of opportunity there.
Right, controlling the docks is classic organized crime.
Totally. And one user brought up the eye-popping wages down there, suggesting maybe the Genovese bosses were, let's say, less greedy than others, which helped keep things stable, kept people loyal.
An interesting theory. Less flashy, maybe.
Perhaps. The thread also touched on their historical influence, like extending over the Philly mob at times. So yeah, the pictures of this large, powerful, wealthy, and incredibly secretive organization.
Okay, so Valachi exposed a lot. But the hearings weren't just about exposure, were they? They wanted tangible results, legislation.
That was the goal. Remember McClellan's opening remarks. These hearings were part of that bigger PSI look into narcotics addiction, too. And eventually, yes, they produced results. In March 1965, the subcommittee put out a bipartisan report.
And that report had recommendations.
It did. A whole list of legislative recommendations designed to hit organized crime and the drug trade harder.
Did Congress listen? Were laws actually passed?
Several key ones were, they got laws authorizing immunity for testimony that was crucial. They revised and beefed up the wiretap statutes.
Addressing RFK's point.
Exactly. They also made witness intimidation a federal crime, a direct response to the danger Valachi faced. Plus, things like allowing civil commitment for drug addicts, setting up a joint task force focused on drugs coming from Mexico, and boosting funding for addiction research.
So quite a few concrete actions came out of it. Any other major laws linked to this period?
Yeah, things kept moving. The Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968 that had wiretap warrant procedures, raised the age for handgun purchases, banned some interstate gun sales. But the real heavyweight champion was the Organized Crime Control Act of 1970.
Ah, and that's where we get RICO, right?
That's the one, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO.
Oh.
Senator McClellan pushed hard for this. It was a game changer.
How so? What made RICO so different?
It allowed prosecutors to go after the entire criminal enterprise, not just individuals for specific crimes. You could prosecute someone for being part of a pattern of racketeering activity.
A pattern, like multiple crimes over time.
Exactly. The law listed 35 specific crimes, things like murder, kidnapping, bribery, extortion, drug trafficking, even terrorism, later on that counted as racketeering activity. If you committed 2 or more of these within 10 years as part of an enterprise, boom, RICO. It meant tougher penalties and aimed to dismantle the whole organization.
So instead of just arresting soldiers, they could target the bosses, the structure itself. That sounds powerful.
Immensely powerful. Still used today, obviously. And that same 1970 act did something else incredibly important, directly because of Valachi.
What was that?
It formally established the Witness Security Program, WITSEC, run by the U.S. Marshals Service.
The program designed to protect people like Valachi.
Precisely. To protect government witnesses and their families when their lives are in danger because they testified. It's been incredibly successful, protected over 19,000 people since then. It's a direct legacy of Valachi needing protection.
It really brings his personal story full circle with the legal changes. Now, stepping back a bit, the sources also gave us some broader context on the Mafia's history, didn't they?
Yeah, the History.com article is useful there. It talks about the Mafia really taking off during Prohibition, making fortunes from illegal booze.
Right, the classic origin story.
And then how they moved heavily into labor unions, using them for extortion, taking bribes, embezzling funds. That McClellan committee, the same one behind the Valachi hearings, had also famously investigated labor racketeering earlier.
And that had an impact on the unions themselves.
It did. The article notes it hurt public support for unions quite a bit. And importantly, the RICO Act we just talked about. It turned out to be a really effective weapon against that kind of labor corruption, too.
Okay. And we also had those Wikipedia pages on Luciano and Genovese to help place these figures.
Right. Context on the key players. Luciano is seen as this modernizer, helping structure organized crime as we came to know it, creating that very commission Valachi talked about.
And Genovese.
Genovese comes across as more ambitious, maybe ruthless, constantly aiming for more power, which ironically led to his downfall. And it was his alleged fear of Valachi talking that, in part, pushed Valachi to seek protection and testify in the first place.
It all connects. So wrapping this up, it feels like the Valachi hearings were genuinely a watershed moment.
Absolutely. They ripped the cover off the Mafia for the public like never before.
Yeah.
Show the structure, the operations, the code of silence, especially for the Genovese family.
And you can draw a straight line from what Valachi revealed to landmark laws like RFICO and the creation of the Witness Security Program, tools still fundamental today.
No question. His testimony, whatever his personal motives, directly led to major shifts in how the legal system combats organized crime.
And looking back through these sources for this deep dive, it really hammers home that ongoing struggle, doesn't it? Against these adaptable, powerful criminal groups. The Rhett comments about secrecy as power really resonate. That's the core challenge law enforcement has always faced.
It really is. Which leads to a final thought, maybe something for you, the listener, to chew on. Think about the immense risk Joseph Valachi took, breaking omerta, knowing the consequences.
A death sentence, basically.
Right. He exposed this hidden world, yes, but the price was living under constant threat, needing this unprecedented government protection program created just for people like him. So here's the question. What does the fact that such extreme measures were, and still are, necessary tell us about the true, deep-rooted power and reach of organized crime, even all these decades later?